You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, I'm joined by Colin Reed of the Substack newsletter, Read the Floor, where we'll discuss more trade noise between Kevin Durant and the Spurs, the other trade rumors the Spurs have been linked to, discussing some draft prospects for the 14th pick. Let's go ahead and begin this episode. So, welcome, Colin Reed. Hey, man, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, exciting finals that we've had. Was hoping that it would be an exciting finals. There's a little bit of a fear that it might be a run over. And after last night, it's a lot more exciting to think that we might have a good series on our hands.
So the crazy thing about watching Indiana basketball is that I'm always telling myself in my head, like, it has to be more than 18 points, like with 3 minutes left. They have to be down by more than that. If not, there's always a chance. And sure enough, they made that comeback there against the Thunder in game one. That was a wild game. So, listeners of the Spot Up Pod, I do want to introduce who Colin Reed is. So Colin and I go back to our days at Project Spurs, where we both started over there. We were writing there at Project Spurs for a number of years. You know, I was a host of the Spurs cast there, and Colin was a very frequent guest. So if some of you used to listen to the Spurs cast, you're going to recognize Colin's voice because he used to be a frequent visitor on that podcast as well. So I'm very glad to have Colin here. I met him a number of years ago. We were at a scout school in Las Vegas. We went to go see some summer league games, those kind of things, and then you know he's really in depth on stats, on analyzing the game film wise, and then also with his trade cap knowledge. I always text him or call him to kind of get some feedback on things involving the Spurs at times. So I'm really glad to have Colin back here in the picture discussing Spurs basketball with me. So Colin, let's begin with our first topic, which is the latest on Kevin Durant and the Spurs. So this past week, there was some noise regarding KD and the Spurs that has continued to happen. So let's first begin with some of these signs between the Spurs and Kevin Durant. So Shams Charania of ESPN has been very vocal, multiple times on the broadcast and in his tweets and his reporting that the Spurs and Kevin Durant did express interest in joining sides together back during the February trade deadline. Obviously, we know that the deadline went and KD remained on the Suns. But now earlier this week, longtime Suns radio host John Gambadoro, on Twitter, he goes by Gambo. He's very plugged into the Suns front office, kind of knows a lot about, their trade dealings, their free agent happenings, those kind of things. He said that people close to Kevin Durant said that he's interested in joining the Spurs to play alongside Wemby, De'Aaron Fox, and Stephon Castle. Now, Gambo didn't want to report, who would be included on the Spurs side, but he said just looking at kind of the contracts and the players on the roster, you would see something like maybe Devin Vassell, a good young player for the Suns, Harrison Barnes, a veteran, and also because of the contract purposes, and then plus draft capital to the Suns for KD. And he also said if the Suns are going to get a Durant deal done, they want to do it pretty quick, at least before the June 25th draft, so they have a say in who they're drafting should they get, a first or second round pick in that kind of a deal. So one of the examples I looked at over on the Spot Up Shot this past week was I wrote about a package that looks like some Devin Vassell and Harrison Barnes plus the 14th pick for KD. So my first question to you, Colin, is kind of what are your first thoughts on this noise about Durant and the Spurs, and then also that first package I just sent to you? Do you think that's enough, or who says no in that situation?
Yeah, it's really interesting that the Spurs are linked to names like Kevin Durant and Giannis. That's not something that I think we've been used to in our time covering the Spurs. The biggest name was, LaMarcus Aldridge might want to join the Spurs. So it's crazy to be the center of that universe a little bit. I think, we're probably going to talk about Giannis a little later. I think Giannis is an incredible fit with the Spurs for the reasons of defense, and also just you have so much talent in the room, but he's not as great of a fit on offense. You have 3 or 4 players on your roster whose best offensive skill is driving to the basket and putting pressure on the rim. And so it's at some point and Wemby's not one of them. So now you're saying there are these players that need the ball in their hands to really create an advantage that's taking the ball out of Wemby's hands. I think they can make it work out just because of the sheer amount of talent. But from an offensive standpoint, Kevin Durant is the perfect fit for this team. I mean, if you were looking at, you have Fox and you have Wemby, what kind of wing would you want to pair them with? Kevin Durant or Cam Johnson, who I'm sure we'll get into at some point as well. Those are the 2 names that would really form that trio of you kind of have everything you need in this little core of players, and then you just complement around them with different pieces. I keep going back to something similar to what that first package that you were saying. My only concern here is all of a sudden in the 11th hour, an hour or two ago from right now when we're recording,
Yes.
we get the reporting that the Raptors are in the game,
Yeah.
which my little sidebar, I don't understand why the Raptors are in any of these games. They're not necessarily a contender after any of these players, but that's beside the point. So I think the Spurs might need to include like a garbage first or like 5 seconds or something on top of this to get it done. Now, personally, for me, I would love if they could keep Barnes and put Keldon in there instead, just because I do think Barnes shooting is going to be really important as we're starting to like see this Spurs roster develop. They need as much shooting as they can get, and Barnes provided a lot of that for them last year. So if they could do Vassell and Keldon, you're able to keep the shooting from Barnes on the roster, which I think would be advantageous.
Have you had a chance to mess with the trades? Because I use Spotrax, and they have pretty good systems, and I was in the 24-25 salary cap when I was putting this package together, and I couldn't. Yeah. For them, it was saying that I couldn't put Vassell and Keldon together from what I was seeing there. Were you able to see that somewhere else that it could work with Keldon?
I wonder if I was accidentally set on 25-26 because all of them are starting to default to that now, and you have to like go in and change it. Yeah, I thought I was able to get that, but I could see how the salary would be.
And it's weird because go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was saying yeah. I mean, if it has to be Barnes, it's the shooting aspect for me.
I would rather obviously. And yeah, for some reason it's weird because I did address this Kevin Durant rumor back in a podcast episode back in April, and it worked then. For some reason it was even in the 24-25 salary where it said like Vassell and Keldon worked, and you didn't have to put in Barnes. So I think maybe, or even if they have to wait, maybe they agree on the trade and then they they wait to make it in the 25-26 year, which is after July 6th. They could still do something like that. And so yeah, I know you kind of mentioned the second package. The second package is like Keldon, Barnes, and Sohan for the 14th pick. Again, I don't think that's as high of on the Suns' wish list, for a return package for KD, kind of like what Gambo said in that radio show. I think that they would want a young player like Devin Vassell, and maybe that 14th pick might be enough. Or if they got to go to a few seconds, like you mentioned, I think that gets it done. Something to mention about KD though is from the Spurs' viewpoint that they don't have to look at this as just a 1-year rental. Is that KD is extension eligible right now? So let's just say the Spurs and Suns got a deal done on draft day, then the Spurs, according to Bobby Marks, could sign KD to a 2-year extension for $100 million for 2 years. If they wanted to get, if they wanted to wait, they could wait 6 months and then sign. KD could sign a $124 million extension for 6 months. So, what are your thoughts there? The fact that this doesn't just have to be a 1-year sample with KD. They could actually, the Spurs and KD, if they're interested, they can make this Fox, Wemby, Kevin Durant trio something for like the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think a couple of items here, and this is one of the reasons why the Kevin Durant thing is a little bit more appealing than Giannis as well. Giannis is only 30, so it is a big difference there. But I think that Kevin Durant's game is one that's going to age gracefully. I think that the other end of the court defense is where it's probably going to be hit the most as he starts to get older. But, he's never going to be not 7 foot tall while he's in the NBA. He's never not going to have that frame and that shooting ability. So I think, you hear, 3 years and he's already 36 right now. Like that seems crazy. But I think, it's so much easier to pivot in today's NBA now than people realize. I think people look at stuff like the Bradley Beal trade, and that's hard for a number of reasons, the no trade clause and a bunch of other things. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to use the terrible trades that have really locked teams up as the rule, when I think people often forget that so much of the time it's actually very easy to pivot out of these situations. I remember when the Suns signed Chris Paul to the extension after their finals run, people were like, oh my gosh, he's so old. Like this extension is going to be so bad. And they were able to trade him for value on that contract. So I actually think an extension would be fine. I think that, that's going to make the salary a little tight. But honestly, I think, again, he's just the perfect offensive fit next to Wemby. It's also a player who Wemby said that he's really looked up to growing up and he wants to learn from. So I think that that's important as well. And I think, and I'm sure you've probably gotten into this and that you've been thinking about this as well, just the rumors that we've started to hear about the Spurs trying to make a big swing. Like, I think the Spurs need to be good next year. I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know if that's 500 or playoffs, but not a home team, whatever. They need to be good next year, and they're going to make a push for it without sacrificing all of their future. So I think Kevin Durant kind of fits a lot of the boxes, and I think getting him for 3 years is a really, honestly, I like it. I know that takes him to his 39 or 40 season, depending on what the extension is, opting in, opting out, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's as bad for the Spurs as some people might on the surface.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying there, I looked at his his game logs basically, and he played enough last year to get qualified for awards for over 65 games this year. Yes, he did play 62, but that's just 3 shy of the 65 games. Plus, he's on a team where he has no depth, where him and Devin Booker, are basically needed for everything. And so there, when you're on a team with San Antonio with Wemby, with Fox, who are going to draw so much attention, Stephon Castle, most likely Dylan Harper as well. He doesn't. Yes, he's going to still have a big role on the Spurs, but they're not going to be relying on him as much as he's been needed in Phoenix. So I think that's what you said there about. So it's like looking at the fact that he was 36 last year, 35, 36, and he still made All NBA second team. He was an All-Star this year. He was an All-Star by February still this year, and like I said, he barely missed making an All NBA team this past season because of his games limit. But he is going to be 37. So that's what I agree with you there. Where I think that because of the team he's on, he's not going to be it's going to be a little bit easier to manage his health situation. And like I said, the last 2 years he's been relatively healthy. I know that he didn't qualify for awards this year, but he's kind of been there. And so just continue lastly with the Kevin Durant situation, or the rumor right now. Let's just say the Spurs did acquire Durant for maybe Vassell, the 14th pick, in Harrison Barnes. Then this is kind of their core lineup, these 10 players. It's a Wemby, KD, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper if they draft him second, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, Julian Champagnie, and Blake Wesley. So that's like your core 10 players. Plus you still have the $14.5 million in non-tax middle of exception that can be used to trade for a player or sign a free agent. And they'd have the $5.1 million biannual exception to either trade for a player or sign a free agent. Do you have any comments there about just kind of what the roster kind of looks like if they were to get Durant?
Yeah, I think especially if you're able to manage health with playing Kevin Durant that 60 to 65 games, and then Fox and Wemby the 70 to 75 games, I think to me that's a team whose ceiling, and obviously these things can change a lot.
Yeah.
But just on paper, you think of something like the 4th seed, right in that range. And sometimes they're so bunched up, like the Rockets got the 2nd seed this year, but they're a game away from the 6th. But I think anywhere from kind of mostly starting a playoff series on the road or hosting a play-in game. So like that 5 to 8 range, I think would be really likely. And, that's kind of just me using the priors of what Wemby was last season. I'm under the impression, though, that, if he's fully healthy, like we very well could get MVP level or sub MVP level Wemby. And if that's what is on this roster, with Fox fully healthy, his finger is healed, and now KD has his scoring prowess, but he can kind of be the 3rd option or the get out of jail free card when things bog down. I mean, I think that team has the upside to be really, really good. And I think that that's kind of one of the things people are looking at Kevin Durant's salary and they're looking at his age. But like when you start to look at kind of how the chemistry can work together, especially if Wemby does take that 3rd-year jump that so many players do, I mean, who knows? Like the Rockets went from 12th last year to 2nd this year, and if the West is kind of as bunched together and as, the top was so strong, but the middle kind of had its warts. I mean, I don't even think that would be all that crazy for the Spurs to make some sort of jump like that. That just, it's a very good team on paper, but it's the biggest thing for that team would be managing health. Because if any one of those 3 guys goes out, then I do think it would really affect their win total.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. The fact that the West is one of those, like outside of OKC, like everybody was right. Even I think up until like December when the Spurs were still kind of the playing range, they weren't far from like the 6th seed at that time. It was just weird. So again, I think you're right with these players on paper. The roster that you put together. Plus, we don't know what they're going to do with those 2 exceptions. They could go out and get an extra big or another wing. Trade for that player or sign that player. So there's definitely a lot of options there. All right, so now, Colin, let's go and get into our second topic here, and this is all the other players the Spurs are getting linked to. So, like you mentioned, the Spurs, they have a lot of draft assets. They also have young players like Stephon Castle, like Devin Vassell, and then plus a lot of players in the NBA want to play with Wemby, a player who you described as a very good player, up and coming here in the NBA. And so, because of that, we're seeing the Spurs' name linked to a lot of different players. So let's begin with one of the first players who I've talked about here on the Spotted Pod, and it's Giannis Antetokounmpo. So back on May 18th, when I recorded my last episode, at that time, Chris Haynes had reported that Giannis was supposed to go into a meeting with the Milwaukee Bucks that following week. Well, time has passed. Basically, 2 weeks has gone on since that meeting took place, but we've seen really no reporting, whether that meeting even took place or what was the outcome of that meeting, because there's been no reporting that Giannis has yet to demand a trade. There's also been no reporting of the Bucks calling teams, things like that. So all is basically still quiet on the Giannis end. We're still kind of waiting to see what's going to happen here. except that the rumors are starting to take place that maybe like the Knicks or Toronto Raptors want to get involved in trying to get Giannis. I know that was one of the ones that came out today was the Knicks that they might look at. They're asking Dallas whether or not they can interview Jason Kidd for their head coaching position, and then of course we know Kidd did coach Giannis in Milwaukee. But again, right now it's kind of been quiet on the Giannis end. We're just kind of waiting. Let's just say though that Giannis does want out, and the Spurs do have interest. Here's my baseline, because I've been talking to people, a lot of different Spurs fans, over the past few weeks since this first came out that Giannis might be available. Do you agree with me that if Giannis were available, I think the Spurs do have to give up both the second pick and Stephon Castle in any kind of trade? Do you agree with that, or is that too much? What do you think?
I've kind of been under the assumption that it'd be the second pick without Castle and then a whole bunch of other stuff, but I could see a world where they're saying we're not going to pull the trigger unless Castle's in the deal, and yeah. So I would not be surprised if that was the case. When I've been building ideas and trying to discuss it like you have, I've been trying to use the second as a baseline for like this is the asset, and we're going to kind of throw in as much stuff around it as we can without Castle. But I'm sure the Bucks are going to do their darndest to get that in there if it really does come to that.
Yeah, and especially the fact that they're going to generate a lot of trader interest whenever if that happens that Giannis does want out, because like we said, we already have the Knicks there, we already have the Raptors name getting linked there, the Rockets of course might be linked there, the Nets as well. So I think you might be right there that maybe I haven't taken that approach in terms of my mindset of the Giannis situation. Maybe not including Castle just yet, just using the second pick and seeing asking those teams well, can you beat just even the second pick alone and see where they're at. I think I agree with you there, because initially my thought was Giannis is a top 3 player right now in terms of being in the MVP race. He finished third in that voting. Obviously we know the Bucks aren't really going anywhere right now, but he's still basically carried that team. And so I thought that since you're getting a player, I know he's 30 already, I thought that you would have to give a Castle and the second pick for him. But that's interesting that you think that it might just take the second pick right now, unless that becomes like the deal breaker, is Castle being included or not. So yeah, that was basically there. I'm not going to go through some of the trade packages because those were mainly built, with Castle included. So just kind of give me your thoughts just as this Giannis rumor has gone on. What are your thoughts? I know you kind of talked about how maybe offensively he's not the best fit for the Spurs.
Yeah.
Defensively, I think I've spoken as well about how him and Wemby would be monsters on the defensive end. It would be scary.
Yeah.
Inside and out. But yeah, just kind of give me your thoughts about like I think you kind of really have. You've already said you'd prefer kind of right now to maybe get KD if that was just because you're not giving up as much and it's still a pretty safe route. What do you just kind of give me your thoughts on the Giannis side?
Yeah, I do think so. For what I was saying earlier, even though there are some questions on the offensive end, and if you're trading Castle, that actually, interestingly, so one of your packages has Keldon and Castle in it, and those are two of the players that I was talking about whose offense really comes from drives.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden it's just Fox and Giannis, and that changes that a lot. And even though the offense, it's not entirely clear what that would look like if you have Giannis surrounded by a whole bunch of minus shooters, I think it's one of those things that at the end of the day we can overthink it. I think the talent just takes you so far. Like the talent alone, something that it's going to be amazing. It might be amazing because the defense is impossible to score on and the offense is 10 in the NBA. Like that would be enough. So I still think I'm still really high on the idea of the Spurs getting Giannis. And again, I'm kind of going back to the same thing that you were in terms of, or that I had talked about in the last segment about age, where so many people are concerned because he's 30 years old. So I went back and I looked at when Magic Johnson joined the Lakers and how old Kareem was when they finally won a title. Together. I mean, he had won a title before, but won one with the Lakers. So Kareem was 33 when he won his first title with the Lakers, and he won 4 total with the Lakers. And modern medicine, obviously, his longevity for the time was completely unfounded. Like no one had done that kind of thing before. But sports medicine has come so far. We have LeBron James being a top 20 player or better at the age of 40. Like I'm not necessarily super concerned. Other than the fact that so much of his game is predicated on athleticism. But again, I mean, LeBron is still like an athletic freak of nature and he's 40 years old. So I'm actually pretty high on either of these trades. I do think the Kevin Durant trade leaves you in a place where you are more whole from your roster and you're having to make up less of the pieces. And then also the shooting element is there. But I think, I mean, if you have Giannis and Wemby, I think that people like free agents and other players are going to be falling over themselves to get to your team. So I don't think that's going to be a huge deal. One of the things I didn't think of with the Castle part, until you mentioned it, was because the whole reason why I thought of the number 2 pick being like the main thing is I feel like everything I've read and heard and seen about Dylan Harper is if you're going to tear your franchise down to the studs, like Dylan Harper seems to be a pretty good player to like have the first piece of this rebuild. And so part of me is wondering, what if it became a 3-teamer and Castle went to someplace like the Magic who needs more guard help, and then all of a sudden maybe the Magic are sending things to the Bucks, and that makes it a little bit easier for the Spurs to get there. But yeah, I'm high on the Kevin Durant trade because of how the roster would still be pretty whole afterwards, and he fits a lot of the holes that the Spurs have. But I think Giannis and Wemby just covers so much, and it's such a talented core that you could put, 3 random regular people around them and they'd probably still win NBA games.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to for the Spurs. Like, do you take like if those players are available, Kevin Durant wants to go to the Spurs, or Giannis says he wants out of Milwaukee and the Spurs might be one of the teams with interest in him. Do you take that approach of like not having to give so much, for KD? I know he's an older player, whereas you can get a guy like Giannis who's a top 3 MVP player. But again, it might take, like I said, could take both either the second pick, or it could take both the second pick and Castle plus other players as well. So again, I think that those are just the conversations to kind of look at. And like I said, I'm interested I'm interested to know why there was no reporting. Did they actually have the meeting, the Bucks and Giannis? What's going on? I do wonder too if maybe he's thinking about just staying in Milwaukee because he's seeing how much the Eastern Conference is kind of like opened up with Jason Tatum probably out all of next year. I know the Dame's still out as well though. So again, the Giannis conversation will continue to get interesting. And like we said, there's been more reporting that more teams are getting involved here. The Knicks, the Raptors. So the price will go up for if Giannis wants out. The trade packages. That's where who is it? Milwaukee can be a little bit smarter than Dallas and actually say, hey, Giannis is available. What's your best stuff? And instead of like the Mavericks who just did the Luka deal in silence, and so nobody got to get involved there. So anyway,
what I do think the other part about that too is I still think that him staying in Milwaukee is probably, out of all of the options, like it traded to the Rockets or the Spurs or whatever, if you take all of the individual possible outcomes, I think staying in Milwaukee is still the most likely one. But I will say, the longer it goes on without like a definitive Giannis wants to stay in Milwaukee, the shakier that becomes, because it's easier to not do anything than it is to do something. So obviously he's really considering the idea of what would it look like if I moved on, because it's taken this long. I think if he had already come to the conclusion that he wants to stay, we would have heard that reporting. And I think that staying is obviously probably very high on his list right now, but it is just, the longer it takes, the more I'm starting to think, okay, this might actually happen, just because it'd be easier to just say, oh, I'm staying, and it would all be over at that point.
Okay. Yeah. No, like I said, and we'll definitely probably get that answer close to the draft because, like I said, if the Bucks do move him, they want to know who they're getting in with that pick, whatever picks they get, for him in any kind of deal. All right. Let's move on to some other players who kind of been in the trade rumor rumbling. So this one's an interesting one. So I saw, I think it was on Monday, Trey Murphy III. There was a bunch of like everybody was talking on X on Twitter about Trey Murphy trades from the Pelicans, and so I was like, where are people getting this from? Like, did he say he wants out? No, I haven't seen no reporting that he wants out. Are the Pelicans looking to shop him? No, there hasn't been any reporting there. So it turns out that it's coming from some gambling sites, basically, or just like saying, a player under contract, where's his most likely team? Well, hey, the Spurs were mentioned in there from that gambling site. So according to Bovada on May 31st, they had some odds about where Trey Murphy could end up next season. So Denver was the favorite at plus 500. So of course, a lot of Nuggets fans were super excited and putting trade packages together for Murphy. But then the Spurs also were right behind them. The Spurs and Indiana Pacers were basically tied for second, most likely to land Murphy according to these odds at plus 700. And so, like I said, there's actually no reporting that the Pels are looking to move Murphy, or that Murphy wants out of New Orleans. But he is just a very interesting player. I really like him as a player. If he was available for trade, I think the Spurs should definitely look at him. So let's just talk about him right now. One thing to note about his contract, according to Spotrac, is that since he signed his extension last season, he can't be traded until after July 1st, 2025, which means that a trade deal cannot be completed until after the July 6th moratorium. So really, just looking at Murphy, his contract is basically very similar to Devin Vassell's. They're kind of right there in that like $25 to $30 million range for the next 4 seasons. So the easiest deal would just be Vassell for Murphy. Murphy. So then the question becomes, how many draft picks do the Pelicans want for Murphy? And so considering Murphy's on a good 4-year extension, I would at least start with the baseline of like 2 to 3 first-round picks for him. I know he's not like an all-star or anything like that, but we saw also Mikal Bridges get traded for 5 first-round picks and a pick swap to the Knicks, also. So just kind of give me your thoughts on Trey Murphy if he were to become available, because like I said, he's not actually available right now from what I've seen.
Yeah, again, a wing who can score and can shoot the leather off the ball, and like obviously that's a great, like that's just the perfect kind of thing in San Antonio right now. Anyway, like that's the perfect archetype of a player that the San Antonio Spurs need as they're continuing to build around Fox and Wemby. But I had not thought of the thing that they couldn't trade him before July 1st, which really changes the game, because that means that you can't include this year's picks in any sort of deal.
Oh, yeah.
And if that's the case, like the Hawks are kind of ascending. Like Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson are like only getting better, and like those picks might not be as good as we once thought they would be. And the Spurs, if you trade Trey Murphy to the Spurs, Fox, Wemby, and Trey Murphy is a pretty good team. So after July 1st, what draft assets do the Spurs have that are really powerful from the perspective of the Pelicans? Like a lot of these deals, you would probably want to get them done around the draft or earlier for the Spurs if draft capital is the biggest thing going out, because the 2nd and the 14th pick are probably the most powerful draft assets the Spurs are going to have for a long, long time. There is that 2030 swap that is starting to get a whole bunch of players involved, and I'm probably going to bring that one up in the next player that we talk about. But I mean, if you have to wait till July 1st, I just don't even know if they can that the picks just don't look as appealing to me. I think another team could come in and make a more appealing offer at that point.
What do you like I said, we're not going to spend too much time on Murphy because, like I said, there's actually been no reporting that he's even available. But what do you think is the limit for the Spurs in terms of either amount of first round picks or swaps? Like for me, I think it's like 3 first, or actually I feel like that's too much still. I think it's maybe 2, like max. Like I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we and it's hard to keep track sometimes of like, was this reported by a real place or did I just see this randomly on Twitter? But I feel like I'd seen something connecting the Spurs to Cam Johnson at some point. Mm-hmm. And like, because we already have that out there, it's like, well, if the price is going to be 3 first, at some point it's like, do the Spurs just go down other avenues where they get a player who's 90% of Trey Murphy? And that still fits their need. But yeah, 3 firsts, it is kind of hard if it's not a player that's like I just, yeah, that starts to get hard. The swaps, because now you're really tying up your draft capital. But Trey Murphy would be a player that'd be really easy to move too. So that's not necessarily as big of a problem. I don't know. It's hard now that I'm thinking about the July 1st thing, though. It's just hard for me to even see a pathway to a deal getting done without like a Mikal Bridges type thing, where it's like, a bunch of first round picks, but they're bad first round picks. But that just hamstrings the Spurs so much for just Trey Murphy at that point. And he's a great player, but I think they want to, like, if they're going to take a big swing, they either want it to be for like a big superstar or big star at this point in Kevin Durant, or multiple players that can really help them right now. I don't know if they want to take their big swing and they're walking away with Trey Murphy, and now they don't really have the capital to make another move after that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so let's just move on to that player who you're talking about, who I did write about back in February. Right at the trade deadline, we know Cam Johnson has been available by the Nets. And so now that the the draft's coming up, his salary for this year is still $22.5 million before the draft. So the Nets reportedly, there's been some reporting recently that they do want a top 10 pick for him, in this draft. And so, I don't know if 14 and like Keldon Johnson and Harrison Barnes is, or Harrison Barnes is enough. Is like basically 14 enough, or or can you do, like you said, can you do a 14 and a pick swap for Cam Johnson? So what are I know you said you like him for the Spurs. What are your thoughts on Cam Johnson?
Yeah, I think, again, a big wing who can shoot and then also can defend. Great fit for the Spurs. The whole idea of movement shooter too. I think sometimes we can get so bogged down in, this guy has a high 3-point percentage, but you can leave out the context of how they're doing it. And Cam Johnson is one of those movement shooters. He's going to fly around screens. And I think there are certain players on the Spurs roster, like Sohan, where you're saying, okay, your direct contribution on offense maybe isn't necessarily you're putting the ball in the basket, but it's like setting really savvy off-ball screens to get Cam Johnson open. I do think his value on offense would grow in that place if he's on the roster after all of these trades. One of the things I floated was using a lot of the draft assets that the Spurs have, and based on what we've talked about, it's actually even less than I would necessarily think. And like trying to get KD and Cam Johnson, because now all of a sudden those are your two forwards, and that looks pretty insane to me. But how you had mentioned, like necessarily what would the Nets want? I think if the 14th pick plus filler is not enough, why not just include them in the 2030 swap? Because that already has like 3 teams in it. So it's like, okay, they get the 14th pick this year, and then they get the best of theirs, the Spurs, the Mavs, the Timberwolves pick, and the Spurs get the second best, and then the Mavs get the third best, and the Wolves get the fourth. And at that point, like, pick swaps are not nearly as valuable as first-round picks, but you're getting so many teams in there now that you feel like there's probably some value to be had there. And I think for the Spurs, the upshot on that is, the Nets aren't very good right now, and we don't necessarily see a pathway for them to get there. So if they're still the worst of those 4 teams by 2030, the Spurs including them in this pick swap doesn't actually lose them anything. It's the same thing that the Spurs would be anyway. So, yeah, part of me thinks that pick swap, because it's getting so many teams in it, might be for any one of these trades. If the 14th isn't enough for teams, that might be just enough to put it over the top. Or like we've seen the whole thing of like including 5 second-round picks and deals a lot lately, and the Spurs have 1 million second-round picks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if the 14th is not enough, they do have some interesting things to sweeten the deal. It's just they're more of like sweeteners, which is why the Trey Murphy thing was hard for me to get to. Like if you build around the 14th in Devin Vassell or whatever, and then you can sweeten it to get it there, I actually think that might start getting closer for Cam Johnson. And if that's the case, honestly, I feel like the Nets could have gotten more for Cam Johnson at the trade deadline, but that is maybe not our concern.
Yeah. So, okay. And then, there's also, it's not reporting. It's just been like kind of conversations thrown out there about, we've been seeing that the Celtics are most likely going to be moving off from some players, especially with losing Tatum for a year due to injury. And so, I think it was Chris Mannix was on somebody's podcast, and I think it was Kevin O'Connor's. He mentioned the idea of like if the Celtics are looking to move players, and let's just say they looked at moving Jaylen Brown, then the Spurs should be a team that should be interested. But again, there's an actual reporting that the Spurs are looking to acquire Brown, or that the Celtics are looking to move him right now. But again, I think what you just said earlier was that the fact that the Spurs have so much assets and that players want to come with Wemby, I think that they're always just going to be linked to anyone whose name becomes available. Did you kind of just want to speak about that?
Yeah, and so I guess the one change that I would make to my point of it's going to be harder for the Spurs to make a trade involving draft capital after July 1st is, unless there's some other thing in the deal that the Spurs are getting back, I would not include the second pick for Trey Murphy, for instance. But a trade can happen after the start of the new league year if Harper is going to be the centerpiece of it. Then you just wait the 30 days after he's signed or whatnot. Maybe if you know something's coming, you wait to sign. There's a lot of ways around that if Harper is going to be the one included. But if he's not, then that's when it starts to get a little bit harder to include stuff. I don't know. Jaylen Brown came so much out of left field that these 4 names that we've already talked about, like, have been easy to like really analyze, and now it's like, oh my gosh, there's like 12 names I need to keep track of.
Yeah, that's why I need to build a package for him, because like it's like I don't know how much of that is real. Let's just wait. And Celtics really gonna. I think if anyone's gonna move from the Celtics, it's gonna be players like Drew Holiday, like Kristaps Porzingis. At worst, Derek White. If they really want to move somebody, which I know they want to keep Derek, they really like him, but again. They really have to do deals. I think those are kind of players before Jaylen Brown. Again, I don't think that they're going to move on from one of their cornerstone players foundation.
Yeah, I think Brown is kind of like splitting the middle of the idea of the Giannis trade and the KD trade, but in like the worst way. Like I think the Giannis trade is the idea of you're maybe giving up a lot in the current to just make your roster super talented. And the KD trade is you're giving up less, but you're getting star power on your team. And Jaylen Brown is kind of the middle ground. And I don't think the middle ground is worth it for the Spurs at this point.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Let's keep going. All right, so now moving on to our final topic. Let's go ahead and discuss some prospects at the 14th pick range for the Spurs. So before we go into the 14th pick, I want to bring up the second pick. Colin, do you agree that if the Spurs do decide to keep the second pick, that they should go ahead and draft Dylan Harper with that pick?
Yes, I'm not a draft head, and I don't know too much about college basketball. But when this time of year comes up, there's a big list of people I trust, and the overwhelming consensus. I mean, I think every single person that I ever use for these types of resources are saying he is number 2 in a tier of his own. Like tier 1 is Cooper Flag, and then tier 2 is Dylan Harper, and then tier 3 are the other top 10 picks or whatever, top 5, whatever. So to me, it's I heard at one point someone describe it as fit is okay if you have the players within a tier, but if they're different tiers, you should just go best player available because of the talent level. And to me, I think the upside of Harper is just like you figure it out. This is the first year he'd be there. Like you don't not draft someone because you have a log jam this year, and then 5 years down the road, it's like, oh well, this All NBA guy we could have had, and the Spurs could have had this player, and now they don't have a good point guard or something like that. So for me, you would rather have the talent in the door. It's kind of like the honest thing, where it's like I don't know exactly how their offense would fit together, but talent works out at some level. If you just lots of talent will produce wins no matter how they fit. I remember people were saying the same thing about James Harden and Chris Paul, and their first season together, they almost took down the Kevin Durant Warriors. So I think you just bring in the best player available. I think that's Dylan Harper. I think if Dylan Harper hits, like he has the chance to be like that All NBA point guard next to Wemby. And like the only thing I would give that up for is Giannis, because that's a surefire thing right now. That's like a bird in the hand versus two in the bush. But outside of that, the idea of having a player with All NBA upside, I just don't think you pass on that, no matter what your guard room looks like right now.
Okay, and then I haven't brought him up yet, Ace Bailey. So I just want to talk about him because I know that on lottery night, I saw that the Spurs got the number 2 pick, and like you, I'm not really plugged into the college game, but I do. So I also read people that I trust in the scouting world. Plus, I like to watch my own film around this time of the year, and I finally had time to go back and look at Ace Bailey, and I'm kind of glad that I kind of backed off right away from him and just decided Harper is the second best pick. So just to kind of describe, I wrote about him from one of my scouting reports. 6'9" forward out of Rutgers, for me, on offense plays a lot more like Rudy Gay. I know that people have like more T-Mac kind of comparisons and more like Rudy Gay, Michael Porter Jr. kind of play for me. Just goes to the mid-range jumper a lot, likes to go inside against and he takes a lot of contested shots. He can also shoot the 3 ball as well. He definitely has a lot of length on defense, but from what I saw, Rutgers never put him like on the primary defensive matchups, so he was more so like a help defender. Weaknesses I saw in the tape was turnovers, lack of playmaking for teammates, and then just getting by defenders at the NBA level. I think it's going to be very difficult for him. A lot of times he tries to take someone off the dribble, and at the college level, he couldn't get by a lot of those players, so he would end up taking contested 15, 17 footers or going into the post and doing like turnaround shots, which are very difficult at the NBA level. And then on defense as well, again, he wasn't the key defender, point of attack defender for Rutgers. They wanted him on on corner shooters and things like that, so obviously he wasn't trustworthy there as well. So again, I think that kind of what you said is that I think Harper is the second best pick that you can take, and so I think that the Spurs should stay away from Bailey there, who's supposed to go third, possibly to Philadelphia. But now let's get into some prospects in the 14th pick range. So I've scouted 2 prospects recently. One of the players I was intrigued by was Thomas Sorber from I don't even remember what he played. Anyway, Georgetown. Yeah, he's from Georgetown. So his mock average is a little bit higher. He's at 19.2 from my last draft board. And so basically, that's a little early to take him with the 14th pick. However, 2 mocks did have him going 14. So he's basically a 6'10" center with a lot of length out of Georgetown. He's gonna bring you rim protection. He's like a drop kind of big, some rebounding. Offensively, he's kind of developing in that area. He's pretty good at setting picks and rolling. That's kind of his game, working in the short roll, has good hands, good feel for the game. Kind of still learning how to work in the post. It's going to be a lot harder for him, I think, in the NBA, trying to get post up opportunities and finishing. And then also outside shooting is a concern. He only shot 16% from 3. Just like his hitch and like his release look a little bit slower at the NBA at that level. And so I think that if the Spurs do want like a good defensive big on in their backline defense, basically a player behind Wemby, I think Sorber would be a pretty good pick. However, I don't think they should take him with 14. I think they should try to trade back to like 18 to 24 pick range. I think he'll still be there in the draft. So again, I do like Sorber if he's going to bring you like that rebounding, that defensive rim help when Wemby sits. But again, I don't think they should take him at 14. Another player I scouted was Egor Demin, 6'9" point guard out of BYU. So when I say 6'9" point guard, he's literally a point guard. Like I thought, because for me, like you said, like you and I, we don't watch the college games, so for me, I'm going off their heights, the players. I'm looking at a lot of bigs right now and forwards, and I thought, okay, this guy might, yes, he plays point, but he might do some other stuff. No, he's literally a point guard. He runs all of BYU's offense basically, and he's really good. I'm not saying he's bad. He's got excellent floor vision, a really good feel for the game, knows how to set up an offense, just a maestro like in the pick and roll game. And then on defense, he's not like a point of attack defender either. He's more so he guards like threes and fours because of his height and his length, but he's not guarding like the primary ball handlers. And so look, my concerns for him too at the NBA level are just speed. He has a tough time not being able to get downhill if he doesn't have like a pick set for him. And then being off the ball, a lot of times when I was watching his games, I'm like, what does he do? Like he kind of just floats around the perimeter. He's not quite a great shooter just yet. I think he shot 27%. So for me, and a lot of draft experts, their comps were Josh Giddey. That's kind of what I saw from him as well. But for me, he's like a little bit slower than Giddey because Giddey's at least like 6'8". He's like he's closer to 6'9". And then so again, I don't think that the Spurs should take him either with the 14th pick if they're looking at him, just because they already have Fox, they already have Castle, they have Harper as lead ball handlers. And my issue for him is, what's he going to do off the ball? And then I've done a little bit of scouting on Noa Essengue, 6'9" forward from Ratio Farm Ohm, overseas. However, he's started to move up in the mocks where he's actually moving up into the top 10 right now. And so, he's from what I saw early on in the tape, he's a good wing defender. His offense is also still developing, but he's been having some big games overseas in their playoff system over there. But again, I think that he's probably going to be out of the Spurs' range at 14th because right now his mock average is at 11th. And then some players I'm still going to kind of look at are Derek Queen. He's starting to fall a little bit. So right now his mock average is 13th. He could be there at 14th. Carter Bryant, 15th. He's a forward out of Arizona. Asa Newell has a mock average of 16th. I'm going to be doing some scouting on him. And then one of the players I'm intrigued by if he falls is Kaman Malawak at a Duke. Right now, his mock average is 10.7. I know that Kevin O'Connor had him falling to 14 to the Spurs, but most other mocks have him basically going in the top 10. But if he slips, I think that he would be a really good get for the Spurs at 14th. But again, I think he'd really have to slip. Do you have any prospects in mind there at the 14th pick?
Yeah, so my hot prospect take, I don't have any info or anything, but my gut tells me that the Spurs aren't making the 14th pick at the draft. But one player that has kind of intrigued me, I've watched like videos where people break down players' games and such. I've seen Colin Murray Boyles kind of all over the mock drafts, but some of the like really smart draft guys that I follow like really like him a lot. And so I think there might be some value there at 14. There's some mock drafts. Like I just pulled up a random one to try to see if I'm even crazy to mention him. And this one had him at 20. So like, I don't really quite know, but a lot of smart people that I follow are really, really high on him. But yeah, to me, I actually, I'm actually kind of operating under the assumption that they don't use that pick, but I could be proven wrong. Based on all of the smoke we have out there, that's my gut. Yeah. But yeah, I think, and the other thing is you talked about Demin. The one thing that kind of spooked me when you said that was that Nikola Topic hasn't even played for the Oklahoma City Thunder yet. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of scary to me. But outside of that, yeah, I think the good thing about 14 is that it makes it hard to scout, like you are trying to dig into, is there's kind of a separation at that point, whereas people's evaluation starts spreading wildly. So there's like a whole bunch of different players that could be there at 14. But I think that also means there could be some really good value on the board if the Spurs do make the pick. But I imagine that pick is going to be in someone else's hands by the time it gets made.
So, so you don't understand. Every time I'm watching one of these guys' games, and I watch like 3 to 4 of their games, right? And that's in the back of my mind the whole time. It's like, what am I doing? I'm going to trade this pick. So Sorber, I don't feel as bad because, like I said, I think if they do take him, they're trading back or like getting, something like, it's a situation like that. Again, I don't think they go for you, but yeah, that's why as with these prospects, so I was like with like Dylan Harper, I definitely want to watch a lot of his games because like I knew for sure he's probably going to end up at the Spurs if he doesn't get traded to the Bucks for Giannis. But the other players, that I've been watching, like I have that in the back of my mind the entire time. It's like, man, they're probably gonna end up, especially like this latest one with the Kevin Durant rumor this week. It's like, why did I spend so much time scouting these guys at 14? Like it's probably not gonna be there. So I'm doing my due diligence just to kind of have an idea at some players, but. For me too, like I kind of want to go more into players in like the 20s range and just kind of in case they do trade back, because like you said, we've seen the history of general manager Brian Wright. He's been more active as a GM with Spurs trades. I mean, that's something we're not used to over the years. But yeah, Brian Wright has been very active. We saw them do that last year when they had 4 and 8, and they traded the second pick to Minnesota. So yeah, like that's the thing.
Yeah.
And plus, like they're not going to, they have a pretty full roster coming back. You know, they don't have a lot of spots, and unless it's a player who's going to really, address a position of need, then it's going to be hard for one of these two rookies to get some playing time. I know Harper will, obviously, because he's the number 2 pick, but another player, maybe in the 14th pick, may not get that much playing time with players who are established already on this roster. Do you think though that I'm doing the right thing in terms of scouting like forwards and like bigs there? It's kind of the right mindset, not looking at too many guards right now.
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of toolsy wings for the Spurs. Like that's what we've been discussing for some of these trades. And then, bigs who either have I'm always intrigued by the idea of bigs who have like 1 or 2 really elite skills. Like, okay, they're great rim protecting and they're great at rim running, or they can space the floor and they have one other skill. Because, Wemby covers so much ground that if you have a backup that has like 2 or 3 very well-defined strengths, it's easier to build around that. But no, I totally agree. I don't think there's necessarily room for another guard, especially if they do keep the number 2 pick. But I think, kind of going off of what you were saying there about the Spurs, are they going to keep the 14th pick or not, and who could it be? Another thought that I just had that came into my mind was the Spurs. It seems like, okay, this is only year 3 of Wemby. It's 2 years until his supermax, which probably extension, kicks in. But they can't afford, like, if the idea is trading the 14th pick for Kevin Durant or picking a player and that pick just totally whiffs, like that's not, and how long does it take a player who's the 14th pick in the draft to develop into someone who can contribute on this team? And so I think Dylan Harper is different because you can look at him and you can say he's going to contribute day one. Yeah. He's going to bring something to the floor day one. But if the Spurs make the 14th pick and this is not a guy who's ready to play, like they do need to put something competitive around Wemby, again, without mortgaging the future. But do they really have the time to wait 3 years? Oh, and this guy, he's not really all that good, versus bringing someone in who can give them on-court value today. And that's kind of the other part of the reason why I think 14 might be going out the door.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with you too. So yeah, like I'm going to keep looking at, I'll keep writing some scouting reports on players, but yeah, I'm very much in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like they're probably going to end up trading this pick most likely. So yeah, before we close this episode, Colin, let's go through some news and notes. Earlier last week, the Spurs announced that they are going to participate in the California Classic Summer League. So that's going to take place from July 5th through 8th. July 5th versus the Miami Heat, July 6th versus the Golden State Warriors, and then July 8th against the Los Angeles Lakers. Then from there, they'll probably go to Vegas to play in the Summer League. And so that'll be, if they end up taking a player like Dylan Harper, that'll be the chance for Spurs fans to most likely see him in games under a Spurs uniform. And then we do want to note that teams have started doing some of their pre-draft playout workouts and interviews. And so the Spurs, I've seen some reporting that they have worked out 4 different players. They're all players who are probably not going to get drafted. And this is pretty typical for the Spurs. What they do is they work out these players to possibly add them to their summer league teams, for extra players there to kind of get a look at those players. And then just some notable dates that are coming up. June 15th is the draft withdrawal deadline. June 25th and 26th is the NBA draft, day 1 and 2. And then July 1st is free agency. So again, we'll kind of see what happens here. I want to thank Colin for joining me here on this episode of the Spotted Pod. He's the first official guest here. Thank you, Colin, for joining. And make sure you read his work over on Substack. His newsletter is called Read the Floor. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.